I am so delighted to introduce Dr. Milie Fang as our speaker tonight. She's currently a PGY3 at OHSU in Oregon, and she's a longtime member of PeDRA and also an active member of our Early Investigator Committee. I'm so grateful to be working with you. Milie was recently selected to be the Wellness and Medical Student Chief in her dermatology residency program for the upcoming year. This is going to be a great job for you. And tonight she'll be speaking on the topic From Overwhelmed to Empowered, Self-Coaching Strategies for the Early Investigator. Thanks so much, Dr. Fang. We're excited for your talk.
Thank you. I am so honored to give this talk. Okay, awesome. Well, let's get into it. I was part of this program called Better Together. It started in the University of Colorado. It was like a pilot project. And they offered it at my residency program for free. And I just feel like it's really made a difference for just managing, all the things that we deal with being a medical provider and a researcher. So quick, no disclosures. I'm not being paid by the program. I'm not a coach. I'm just like a really happy participant in the program. But if you were to search, this is like their webpage. And they did do and publish a clinical trial showing that through this coaching program, they were able to reduce burnout among all the other things that we often face. So I thought that's really cool. But I have a special interest in wellness. I'm part of the GME well-being committee at OHSU. This is what I hope you will get from my talk today. They might be pretty lofty goals, but I want you to learn about the thought model and how to analyze your thoughts. And we'll talk more about that. I want to help you to identify your values and your purpose, as this will be really important to living your purpose at work and creating ways to do that. So that you feel empowered to reach for the stars. Okay. So we're going to talk about thinking and thoughts. Did you know that 40,000 to 60,000 thoughts per day are produced by your brain? And so it's like 1 to 2 thoughts per waking second. And sadly, 90% of our thoughts are repetitive, 85% of them are negative, which means we say negative things to ourselves over and over all day long, which is awful. And the actions we take or not take from that negative thinking tend to be, negative to us. So what's really important and what we'll kind of hammer home through the thought model is that your thoughts drive your feelings and actions and results in life. It goes in that direction. And so the thought model, which I'll teach you, is an incredible tool to help examine those thoughts, recognize those thoughts, and start to take control of your thoughts. And that will, again, drive your feelings, your actions, and results in your life. If you were to ask yourself, what do you think about right now? Most of us don't know. We're not, we don't have that awareness until we kind of put it down on paper and talk about it. And yeah, most of us aren't paying attention. So this is a fun exercise you can do after the session, a little extra credit homework called a thought download. But essentially, you'll just get a piece of paper or a notes app and just write down all of your thoughts. I want you to avoid censorship and judgment. Just be a curious observer. After you've done that, kind of sit with it for a couple minutes, see if anything else pops up, and write that down too. Here's an example of my thought download when I was preparing this presentation. For example, I wrote, I really want to finish this PowerPoint presentation. I hope I do a good job. I hope the lab comes back soon on that patient so I can write up a case and submit it by the deadline. I want to go to Toronto this summer, for the SBD meeting. I don't know where I want to be in the future. I really love working with kids. Adults are gross. My dog is the most wonderful being. At some point, I need to work on my IRB for my research project. I am so busy, but I need to remember not to forget that there's this SPD mentorship award due at the end of the month. So that's an example of my thought download, and yours might look plus or minus similar. Okay, so what if I rewrote a few of those, especially the ones that maybe the thought would drive a feeling of not so good feelings. So for example, adults are gross. I was like, okay, well, how could I rewrite that to kind of get a different feeling from it? And so I wrote, adults are like bigger children and they deserve good care too. And, that made me feel better. Instead of saying, I am so busy, I rewrote that as I feel so excited about all the opportunities in the field and the chance to work hard, prove myself, and share my contributions. Or I don't know where I want to be in the future. I rewrote that thought as, you know what, no matter what, the future is bright and I'm going to end up where I am meant to be. So I hope you're all thinking, oh my gosh, that was so cool. That felt really nice. So raise your hand if you want to learn how to do that and start feeling better now. So we're going to talk about the thought model. So this is the thought model, CTFAR, CTFAR. That basically stands for circumstance, thought, feeling, action, result, which I kind of alluded to. You know, thoughts drive your feelings, actions, and results in life. So circumstance is essentially something that's neutral and everyone like in a court of law would say like, that's a fact. Like, yeah, that's a stop sign. Or yes, that mug broke and, you know, the coffee spilled or something. So something that is, you know, neutral, like maybe you got feedback, like that would be your circumstance or like a test score, et cetera, et cetera. Your thought would be a statement that pops in your brain from that circumstance. So I don't know if you like walked by the nurse's station and you saw a bunch of donuts, your thought was like, oh my gosh, I want that donut. Feelings are, you know, I think that's kind of intuitive, like happy, sad, frustrated, empowered, annoyed, et cetera, et cetera. I would, when you like, you know, do this exercise, avoid like physiologic feelings like hunger. Try to think of the more kind of emotions. And then action is like, well, what happened from all of that? And then what was the result? So I'm going to walk you through an example that recently happened to me. Circumstance, my attending gave me feedback that my presentation had too much text. I like presented my research proposal, and this was my thought after I got that feedback. I knew I should have cut down more text in my slides. I thought about it, but I was like, oh, I need this information. So that was my thought. What was my feeling? I felt stupid, dread, defeat, hopeless. The action I took after that, I just kind of sulked around in bed. I was just like, what was the result? Oh my gosh, I had insomnia that night and I swore to never check any work emails after 8 p.m. because that's when I saw the email and the feedback and I was like, oh, let me see what they said. So that's one example of the thought model, and we're going to now show you, you know, what would it look like if we change the thought. So one way you can do it is just like just immediately like think of a thought from what I wrote originally, but I like to work backwards. So this is the same thing I just showed you, and I like to think about what's the result that I want when I get feedback, and then I'm just going to work my way backwards. So I wrote that, okay, when I get feedback, I want to be curious about it and I want to experiment with what that is. So if that's like, I need to be more efficient or my notes are too long, I want to, you know, experiment with that. That's the result I want. So now I have to ask, okay, what's the action that needs to like lead to the result? How could I get there? And so, rather than sulking around in bed, what I would have liked to have done is journal about it, write about it, maybe review previous feedback from other high stakes presentations that I've given in my residency, such as you saw in the beginning, I gave learning objectives. I used to never do that. I would just do like an agenda slide. But I really liked when I received that feedback from one of my attendings to like, that is your North Star. And that really helps the audience understand what you want to communicate with your presentation. So that's the action that I want to do to get to my result. And then I'm going to work backwards. I'm like, okay, what kind of feelings do I need to be able to do that action? And so I'm like, oh, well, I want to feel like motivated, enlightened, curious. I think that's kind of what I would need to feel to get to that action. And then finally, I'm like, okay, what kind of thought would help me to get to those feelings, you know, from that circumstance? And so I rewrote that one as, I am so glad he said that because I want to get better at creating impactful presentations that are easy to follow. That's something that I really value and want to do. And boom, I feel so good. Okay, so now let's talk about our feelings and emotions. I want to talk about them. The key to feeling better is to get better at feeling. And we're going to talk more about that. But society has programmed us to believe that if we don't feel good, something is wrong and that something could be fixed if we, you know, bought something, ate or drank something or did whatever, you know, someone's trying to sell us. And so, anyway, there's like a money-making machine that's fueled by our belief that something has gone wrong if we don't feel happy all of the time. But a century of cognitive science data tells us that you can't feel positive emotions more than half the time. It's like we call it the 50-50 rule in the Better Together coaching program, which makes sense because how would you know how to define a positive emotion if you didn't also know its counterpart? And again, tons of data. Sorry, I can't show you the data. It'll be too much text. Hundreds of studies have shown that humans feel uncomfortable or negative emotions about half the time, which I think makes sense. Like things are gonna, come your way, like patient deaths or deaths in the family, or things that it would not be reasonable or appropriate to be happy in those situations. So I liked that was a fact presented in this program because I definitely felt that I need to be happy all the time and something's wrong if I'm not. Okay. So our suffering comes not from the uncomfortable emotions themselves. It actually comes from our resistance to them. And resisting feelings tends to make them worse, more frequent, and perpetuates guilt, shame, and anger. And so it's good to develop skills to identify and process emotions. For example, rather than saying, I am stupid, I like to say, I feel stupid. There's a distinction there. And so getting comfortable with the uncomfortable, and feel the emotions, but see that they're just signals, they're not directives. There's 4 ways that we can respond to uncomfortable emotions. I'm going to encourage you to do the 4th one, but the first 3 are very common. All of us do it. So number 1, you might just react, just take the feeling as a directive and do what it says, whether that's like yelling, crying, fighting, etc. Number 2, avoiding. You might try to avoid the emotion by distracting yourself by overeating, overdrinking, going on your phone and just doom scrolling, watching television shows, shopping, going on social media, etc. Resisting is also, again, a common response to an uncomfortable emotion. You just try to push the feeling away, just like, bottle it up with your willpower, deny it, or you try to put a positive spin on it. I think sarcasm fits really well here, which I tend to do a lot. So I'm guilty of definitely the first 3, but 4, which I encourage you to practice, is allowing the emotion. Did you know that you can pause when you notice the feeling and just accept it? Most feelings don't last longer than a few minutes if you open up to them, just sit with them. They all have a beginning, middle, and an end. And so the more we practice allowing emotions, easier it becomes. The uncomfortable emotions, they don't go away, but allowing them moves us through faster and without the added pain caused by reaction or avoidance. Okay, quick note about feedback. I gave you an example of me getting feedback, and many times in your life, you'll get the receiving end of someone else's opinion of you. It might be from an attending, your boss, co-resident, maybe your partner who didn't like, the food you made, or etc. Sometimes we don't have the option to choose who we ask for feedback from. For example, maybe it's an anonymous patient review or a troll on the internet. What makes feedback positive or negative is your thoughts about it. And so again, that thought model is really a great way to analyze this. And so one way that you can shift into a growth mindset is to ask for critical feedback from those you trust. This is called like engaging with your errors. It's completely against our nature to do this, especially if you're thinking like, oh my God, why would I let someone see and point out all the ways I'm doing everything wrong? But by doing this, you're practicing and welcoming discomfort. And the key here is that you have ownership over your thoughts about and response to that feedback, no matter what the words are. A common human reaction to critical feedback is defensiveness, like, that's not fair, they don't know me, or that's not what I meant. Another response is shame. You just want to crawl into a cave, never come out. Shame says, I'm an idiot, I'll never get it right. But the great news is all of these thoughts are optional. But before we change them, we need to recognize what, our unsupervised brain's response is and then decide if that's serving us. So all those thoughts that I did in my thought download, you kind of go through them and say, like, is this serving me? How could I think about this a little differently? Our primitive brains easily go into defense or shame with constructive feedback. So it's very normal. You should expect it, plan on it, process it. And then only once you've allowed that discomfort, let it sit in there, can you begin to move into a new model, a new thought model. I also wanted to talk about assessment bias because I feel like that kind of goes hand in hand with like feedback. But what if I told you that every single assessment of you was biased, even the good ones? Bias is unavoidable and sometimes devastating reality of human brain development. But no one, not your peers, your patients, or your all-knowing attendings, knows what your actual ability is. All they know is their subjective experience of you, which is filtered, by a lot of cognitive bias. So you might be thinking, whoa, all of my evaluations are totally flawed. No one actually knows the objective truth about me. It's just a bunch of random subjective biased opinions that are masked in a numerical form. So I think that there's some kind of truth. The answer is yes. These things cannot tell you who you are. And so saying, with bias, we do work in a biased, racist, sexist, heteronormative culture. What do we do with that? How can we engage with it, change it, instead of burn out in it? And so the good news is that C line, test scores, assessments, words people use in your evaluations, that goes in under circumstance in that CTFAR model. These are, factual, they're neutral circumstance that you get to decide what you think about. Even the biased ones, even the wrong ones, those are all neutral. And where we get stuck is if we rely on a sense of worthiness based on what someone else says. And while we can't necessarily fix the broken racist, sexist, heteronormative culture, oppressive system that we live in just one little lecture, I'm hoping that I can teach you to respond from a place of empowerment rather than frustration or resentment. That's not to say that you shouldn't feel frustrated or resentful because those are that part of that like 50-50 of the feeling positive and negative emotions. But to remind you that you can choose them when the results are in service to you and not against you. So that doesn't mean you should just brush it off or stop being mad. Sometimes it actually means be more mad, but show up with intention instead of smoldering in hurt until you burn out. Because when we internalize other people's biases, it erodes our sense of value and meaning in our work. And this is really important because we set ourselves up for disappointment and burnout when we base our thoughts about ourselves from other people's thoughts about us. And, not all assessment bias is negative. Even the positive feedback is biased too. And so our job is just to simply become aware of this bias and just not automatically let people's, other people's thoughts about us become our thoughts about ourselves. It's supernatural to love approval and praise. It gives us that awesome surge of dopamine, but the downside comes when we don't get that hit next time and we allow our confidence or self-worth to go out the window. So I'm hoping with this like self-coaching tool, we can show you how to build self-worth intrinsically rather than relying on approval and praise from others. And it's worth it. Okay, we're going to transition now to defining your purpose. What would happen if you believed that you were enough right now? Do you worry that you would stop taking on new challenges, stop reaching for new goals, stop growing? If you think that, you're wrong, and there's data to prove it. So your purpose is your reason for being. It's something that you decide, and knowing your values can help define your purpose. Values are like that's your North Star, that's your core tenet. And these values are informed by our families, friends, culture, society. Some are helpful, some are in conflict, and some get in our way. For example, a lot of us have a value of humility, but then struggle to advocate for ourselves or celebrate our accomplishments because you're scared of being perceived as arrogant. This value may be in conflict with other values we hold, like accomplishment or achievement. In your head, you're like, oh, beware of how you come off here, don't brag, while also thinking, I'm really proud of this thing, and I did, and I want to share it with people. So taking a magnifying glass to these thoughts, again, using that model, we may see the gut pointing in the direction of a core value of humility. But is it true that like the value is under attack if you share accomplishment in public? No, not really. And so through self-coaching, we can start to tease apart values that seem to be in conflict and see how we can honor both at the same time. Okay, being your best at work. It does not mean putting a positive spin on a crappy situation. In fact, it means the exact opposite. It's about seeing clearly what isn't working for you and then getting coaching so that you can act from a place of empowerment rather than victimization or burnout. Think about one expectation you have of yourself. How could you blow this out of the water and over deliver? Start by choosing one domain, define what success looks like exactly, and then go after it. And remember, you're not doing this to get praise, approval, or a grade. Overall, you do this work so that you can honor yourself. I've been working at the VA, so I thought this is very like inspiring for the photo. But you do this work because you are choosing to show up as your best and strengthen your relationship with yourself. You do this work ultimately because you know you are worth your energy. And it's important to stay in, we call it emotional adulthood, when evaluating your expectations in your job in general. This means taking full responsibility for how you feel and not blaming others or the job itself for how you feel. Take the reins back and start controlling how you feel, act, and show up on purpose. We've learned that we choose the life we have, both at home and at work. I want to pause for that because something they said in the coaching program is like, if you think about it, we're adults. You don't actually have to do anything you don't want to do. So, for example, like no one wants to go to the DMV, but I choose to go to the DMV because I'd rather not have my license lapse. And we're always weighing, the risks and benefits or alternatives, et cetera, about the choices we make. So I thought that was pretty powerful. So when it comes to living your purpose at work and aligning your life with your purpose, we can do it now, right now. You don't have to wait next month when your rotation's better, now when you finish training, or not in 10 years when you're finally making real money and doing it the way you want. We can do this right now. So again, going back to that choice mentioned to you about like the DMV example, why do we choose working like 80 hours per week or zero control over your schedule to be the workhorse of a system that gives you little support and less appreciation? You choose it because even if it's not what you want now, it's the path to what you want the most. Or maybe you're discovering that it's not what you want at all, and that's okay too. But by resenting your job in mind, you create even more suffering on top of already difficult circumstance you're in. And so I'm not asking you to feel happy about work all the time or even most of the time. That wouldn't be very realistic, helpful, or even possible. There's so many like injustices, system failures, a lot of unfairness. And how will things change if you change your thoughts to be happy? And so, we agree. I think all of us agree, like things need to change. I mentioned about, like bias and all that, but change doesn't happen from resentment and burnout. It happens from empowerment and motivation, advocacy, diligence, hearing, and being heard. So one way you can lean into your purpose is by setting out an impossible goal. This means you're going to practice failing on purpose while leaning into your values and reasons for being. And this is really hard for us to do as physicians because we set goals that we feel reasonably sure we can do. And they might be a little hard, but in the end, we don't fail all that much, which seems like a good strategy. But the invisible downside of almost never failing is that failure itself becomes really scary. And our brains get the message that failing is wrong, it's bad, it's so uncomfortable that we spend a lot of energy avoiding it. And that's like the hallmark of perfectionism, which I'm guilty of too. We think that being perfect will shield us from the shame, embarrassment, and sadness that failure would bring. But we are wrong. And because of it, we fail by never putting ourselves out there. we engineer smallness in our lives. Not only that, but we don't get to experience any of the good parts that come outside of our comfort zone, like pride, accomplishments, and confidence. So think about, where does this show up for you? What if failure wasn't scary? What if stress was not something that could overtake you? What if you have been in control all along, but just didn't know it? Um, and then we're going to go over an impossible goal example next. But it's basically just a reminder of how, through setting a goal, like an impossible goal, you walk through obstacles that live into your purpose, even when circumstances don't change. It should be big, radical, and impossible. Okay, so let's take an example. This resident has a continuity clinic that does not accept Medicaid, and this resident has a value and purpose of serving the underserved. So let's see what this looks like. Okay, in the C-line circumstance, clinic does not accept Medicaid. Thought. This is the opposite of why, what I'm here for, why I'm here. Feeling resentment, anger, disappointment, you name it. Action, they disengage. They blame the system, the clinic, the hospital, the residency program for this. And then result, she misses a chance to live into her values and make any changes. And overall, by doing this, she becomes in the victim role, and she's not able to serve herself or her patients. Okay, so let's see another scenario where you set an impossible goal. In this case, I'll just show you how it plays out. So C, clinic does not accept Medicaid. Same circumstance. Thought, I want to change this. Maybe I can. Feeling, she feels empowered. Action, she meets with leadership, has really uncomfortable conversations about the business of medicine. She tries to propose some changes. She tries, she fails, she tries again. And in doing so, she aligns with her values and service to her patients. And the result is living into her values regardless if the clinic changes. So I hope you saw what happened there. Okay. In summary, I wanted to just kind of hit home all these points, but your thoughts, they drive your feelings, actions, and results. It's your thoughts. It's all up here. Circumstances are all neutral. The thought model, CTFAR, is a tool to analyze your thoughts. We feel positive and negative emotions 50% of the time. All feedback and assessments are biased. They do not tell an objective truth about you. Change happens from a place of empowerment, not burnout or resentment. And by living into your values and your purpose, you honor yourself. So you got this. Thank you so much for being here and this opportunity. I hope you guys will have awesome discussions after, and I'm happy to answer any questions should that arise. Thank you.